What does Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 hide in the Doey boss fight? As we approach the ending of Chapter 4, there's still quite a few things we must do. Plant some explosives, and in turn, deal with an explosive encounter with an old friend. We're going to be taking a closer look at things you'd normally not see within the game, and of course, breaking things along the way too. We'll be covering instances that are broken by default as well, like this checkpoint that sticks you in an unfortunate scenario, and how to make sense of what's going on here. Am I seeing double? With that said, we have a bit to go over, so let's jump right into the ending of Chapter 4. As always, I usually hit you guys with a brief recap, so everyone knows the sequence of events. So we had just gotten done with the doctor business, and are now heading down to the skylift. This will take us on a trip, where we then make our way back into Safe Haven. Getting into the hub of Safe Haven, Poppy will address us, as she's thrilled to see that we got the Omni Hand. Confident that things are going smoothly, she'll go into the generator room. This initiates dialogue between the two, as we can see Doey doesn't seem too sure with how things are playing out. They are interrupted by a phone call by Ollie. In a panic, Ollie insists that the prototype is outside Safe Haven. This follows with Poppy telling Doey to go out and distract it, as the player is now tasked with fixing the generator. Ollie ends up assisting us as we do all this. Once that's all said and done, Poppy will tell us to head to the Foundation. We'll retrace steps through familiar areas as we go through the sewers again. We'll eventually reach this vat of acid again, but this time around, we'll need to solve this gear puzzle. Once we find all the gears and solve the puzzle, we'll head through this minecart area. But this time, we'll see that this once boarded up path is open now. Going deeper into these caves, we'll see that these tunnels are infested with these nightmare critters. We'll need to plant explosives throughout this area, so we collect explosives and plant them as so. Coming over here, you'll want to grab this purple card, as we'll need it, along with a recording of Doey's parents coming to see him. Sad face. We'll then want to start the gas, followed by having to direct the flow of gas so that it goes through these labeled portions, being A, B, and C. After doing this, we'll then need to initiate the gas overflow procedure, along with fixing the door that is jammed. We'll get chased by these little demons, which leads to this elevator that ends up saving us. Let's go back now though and take a closer look at everything we just endured. So something I noticed right from the start here is the funny business that takes place at this particular save point, once we open this door. If the player decides to reload this save, they'll come to the realization that it puts them into a completely different location. It's the part where we, the player, have to navigate this red gas-filled maze, as we solve the puzzle. There is no mask though, and we're completely locked in this section now. The only solution for this is to reload the save prior to this particular one, and then never use it again, as will always put you in this room. However, you can see from where the save takes place, after opening this door with a blue hand, that's not terribly far from when the game ends up spawning us. To make matters worse, on the game's launch, if you walk by the skylift, you could actually come back to this maze and get locked inside again, which would force you to reload, thus causing the save issue just described. I did this on my first playthrough, and thought I was losing my mind. Anyways, if we follow the skylift's line with the camera, we can see portions of the map that are not loaded in, along with areas we've traversed through before, as most of these areas' graphics are toned down. Coming to the end of the skyline, where it stops loading in, we can see something way off in the distance though. Getting a closer look once again reveals that it's our little lemon friend, just hanging out here, all by his lonesome self. Carrying on though, I try to see in multiple instances if I can get myself down into the large area below, where we end up fighting Doey. This results with a hard no, with all these areas that we just looked at having no collision, hence falling through them and into the great beyond. Deciding to carry on to the next section though, I noticed as I was riding the skylift that a portion of the world was never loaded in, resulting with the player being able to see out of bounds portions of the factory down below. I initially was going to chalk it up to the fact that I'd been messing with the game, but couldn't help myself and decided to exit out the game and load it back up, to see if that was the case. I ended up taking the skylift for another ride, and turns out that this portion of the map simply doesn't load in for me, even without mods. During my initial playthrough, I did not notice this at all surprisingly. As you can see, I just simply wasn't paying attention. I'll just blame it on the lighting going bonkers during this part, I suppose. But yeah, these portions never loaded in. Anyways, we can see that once we get off the skylift, Safe Haven will be loaded in at this point. Coming in for a closer look, we can find Doey in a T-pose position. While I was checking out this chill dough ball, I noticed something below him though. After further investigation, you'll see that it is the one and only true Hurt Kissy. Curiously, her model is much smaller, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. But yeah, she too is, well, half T-posed, with her injured arm in an arm sling. I don't know why she's a small gal though. Moving on, as I approach the vent that grants us access to the main hub of Safe Haven, I notice some light punching through where the wall and ceiling meet. Taking a closer look, and to my surprise, the light we're seeing is actually the out-of-bounds visual of the main hub area. Oops. I suppose a little caulk could fix this? At this point though, as we're exiting the vent, we can see T-Pose Doey will zip over to the generator room, where we end up having our one and only interaction with him during this scene. Something I noticed while checking this area out was this object that was spawned in right outside the generator room, as it plummets into the void. I believe it's an external resistor, which is one of the pieces we need to use while repairing the generator. However, once Doey and Poppy finish talking, Doey heads off to distract the prototype. Following him, he'll sprint through the main hub as he approaches the showers, only to zip through the wall and disappear. Checking this out again, but in slow motion, we'll see that he clips through the wall as he continuously shrinks. He shrinks out of existence and is nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, Poppy's got her sights locked onto the camera, overall giving a creepy vibe, as she gives me a slight jump scare. I fixed the generator though and carried on as I headed towards the sewers. You'll notice in this view we have that we can actually see where the loading occurs as we traverse through this hole that leads to the sewers, being something I missed during my first time coming through here. All of this is not entirely new, as we've come through here before, so I ended up doing the gear puzzle, as we're normally supposed to, and then made my way over to the area where all the explosives are. Heading this way will load in the entirety of this area, as you can see. This is the whole bomb finding and planting section. There's not much to see out of bounds, but here it is. As soon as we turn this corner though, we'll see this little fella flee as we proceed. Curious as to where they go, I took a closer look, finding that they don't get far and vanish once outside the player's view. Traversing through these tunnels, more of these little guys will pursue us as they try to end our life. I noticed that if we leave the tunnel area that they will simply retreat, and if we follow them with a camera, you'll see that they take a trip all the way back to where Baba Chops disappeared just a few moments ago. It's funny looking because they don't despawn, resulting with this particular mini-huggy getting his daily exercise in. However, when we shoot one of these miniature demons, we can see that they will straight up disappear once making it to one of these holes. It's odd how they react differently in each case. Just about as odd as the tails on the Tuies, as they appear strangely elongated. I was gonna try to explore out of reach areas with the player, but as you can see, a lot of these paths literally lead to nothing, so I carried on. Now that we're further into this area, we can see it's the only section loaded in now. With that, I initiated the next objective, as we now need to redirect the gas into the storage tank. Looking closely at the gas as it fills these pipes is visually confusing, as they fill them from right to left when the flow is supposed to be going left to right. We can also see, unsurprisingly, that the pipes are hollow, with no gas inside when we take a closer look. However, once we solve this puzzle, we'll need to fix the door. But something happens that I wasn't aware of during my first playthrough. We can see these little fellas jump on the glass as they end up crawling out of our view and disappear. If we decide to just sit here and wait though, we'll see more nightmare critters as they approach the stairs. But then, an army of critters will start spawning in. There are a ton of them, eventually getting to the point where the whole floor is filled. They'll just run in a straight line, as they don't truly pursue us. It was confusing though, because the ones that were actually pursuing us could be seen retreating. It may have been because I died though, not entirely sure. Needless to say, it was quite the scene, as these monsters filled the room. Fixing the door though, I realized I was able to sit up in this particular area as the critters couldn't reach me. During this, you can see a bunch of them in the previous area frustratingly trying to figure out how to get to me. We can see this one in particular has mad hops, which was pretty cool, but overall is pointless, seeing as they simply cannot reach me. Sorry, not sorry. We'll encounter a few more as we head for the elevator, which will have a few critters spawn in on the door as we escape. But that's about it. So let's carry on now as we normally would throughout this game. We now have to make our way up this elevator, which leads us out and back to this big open area from where we came, as Doey then grabs us from behind. Apparently Doey has lost track of the prototype and he's having trouble understanding what's going on. This is when all of a sudden we can see in the background an explosion occurs within Safe Haven. Doey, being in disbelief, simply says, "Oh no," as he turns the mush into the pipe behind us. So we'll make our way to Safe Haven again. We can hear Doey scream in terror as we make our way through the sewers, along with encountering some nightmare critters. It's when we enter Safe Haven though that we'll see it's in shambles, as there appears to be no survivors. We'll see Doey in the main hub area as the cutscene takes place once we enter the room. Doey's having a mental breakdown while he expresses his sympathy towards all the victims, as he begins to snap on and off into rage, ultimately blaming everyone for the misery him and his friends have endured. As he struggles to cope, he sets his sights on us for revenge, making it clear that he wants us dead now. Accidentally collapsing the structure onto himself, he'll re-emerge as this monstrous creature as he moans and screams in pain. He'll begin to chase us, as we'll need to reach this elevator for temporary safety. I'm gonna tell you right now, my first time playing through this, I was in a panic. So I was honed in while running, looking for an escape. So instead of grabbing the handle, I just jumped down this hill thinking I was supposed to do this. But there's no collision here, so you just fall out of the map, drifting forever in the void. And though we wish for death, we are unable to die. So, we reload? Let's turn back time first though. Once coming up the elevator, we'll see that the bomb planting section unloads. We can then take a closer look at this interaction we have with Doey. He simply appears behind us, sliding for a brief moment as this interaction begins. Wrapped in his arms, or rather, sucked into his body, it gives the appearance that Doey's talking to himself, which does track, seeing as he's about to lose his mind in the next scene. But I digress. We can see that the explosion that occurs off in the distance will spit some rocks out, but when Doey retreats in disbelief, he'll eventually disappear. Slowing this down though, we'll see that his goof form will begin forming right before he vanishes, as this all obviously occurs much faster in real time. Heading back doesn't have too much going on, but I was getting some weird visuals of this hole that takes us back to Safe Haven. We've talked about it before, but I'm pretty sure we're not supposed to be seeing that. Safe Haven is in shambles, and we can find Doey in the main hub waiting for his cutscene to begin. Now during my first playthrough, I noticed that there was a figure that was lingering down the hall. I didn't know what to make of it, but going back later, I came to realize it was Doey's killer monster form just chilling here in front of the elevator. No idea why it's just in plain sight, but here it is. It makes sense to preload the model, but putting it somewhere else might be more ideal. We can watch Doey collapse the debris onto himself, as this is the last time we normally see him in his friendly form. His model will drop further into the darkness, but letting it up, we'll see his monster form down below. Watching this beast come up in slow motion is terrifying, as it rises up with his deformed face rising as well. Clipping through the floor, he'll rise out of the debris, as we'd normally be seeing him at this point. I must say, I do love the model they end up having for his monster form. It's terrifyingly great, and reminds me of that one Rocket Jump video where all the Liquid Slam kids merge together. Glorious! So as I began running from this beast, I decided to go through the fence instead of getting on the elevator. We can watch him pull the elevator down from here, but once he fails, he then ends up residing where we had seen him before. Coming back out, I can jump around the back side of him and shoot some flares. We can now go back to the main hub, but with very limited ground to cover. So I took the time to give a moment of silence to our dear friend Doey, as he's no longer the doe who was once our bro. However, I noticed once we get up and out the elevator, if we come back down with the camera, we can see he's curiously back in the hub area. Now, this is where I accidentally jumped to my death, but in my first playthrough, my game kinda broke here. So for one, respawning for this initial chase threw me into an infinite death loop where I couldn't run after I spawned. So Doey would just kill me over and over. It was like there was an invisible wall in the hallway. Actually, somehow I'm pretty sure there was. And so rewinding to watch the cutscene again, hoping to fix this bug. This time when I went to go on the elevator, the gate was already shut. So I died, and was once again thrown into an infinite death loop. It took me like 45 minutes of messing with the game with mods to get past this, and it was incredibly frustrating. So without cheating, I would have been stuck here until they pushed some kind of fix. But let's move on past this to upstairs again. So instead of jumping off like before, we'll want to grab this handle, make our way down, and continue running. We'll come across a couple obstacles that we need to get through, all while Doey chases us. This will lead us into a hole where Doey grabs a hold of us, but luckily is deterred as a large rock falls onto them. We'll then slide down this mine shaft as we go deeper into this nightmare. It's here though that Doey will catch up with us as a boss fight begins within this large dugout area. At this point we're tasked with having to freeze and cut Doey in order to defeat this mutated pack of kids. There are liquid nitrogen canisters in various spots within this whole area, but you don't want to do what I just did here. Rather, you'll want to get Doey to run over the canister as they will start carrying it. Then you'll time it and shoot it as Doey runs under a saw, allowing you to bring down the saw blade, which will chip away at our poor ex-best friend. We'll do this multiple times, as Doey has various attacks while we progress through this. Eventually we'll defeat this blob, and we will then head out of this area. Finding the exit, we'll need to open this particular door within, but we will be met with an intense jump scare, as Doey is not finished with us. Expressing how much the Pillsbury reject wants us dead, we'll want to shoot the loose canister on the left here as this all takes place, which will cause an explosion that begins to heavily freeze the monster. Fighting through the pain, we attempt to end this poor creature's misery. I personally couldn't help but feel bad for Doey. As stated, Doey tried to be better, but ultimately was bested by the prototype, leading to this horrific demise. So that sucks. Anyways, let's take a closer look at what we just went through. So we had just given a farewell to Doey, but coming over here, we can see that the boss fight area is now loaded in, with a giant death barrier down below. As I was zipping down here into this next part though, I saw Killer Doey slide in from my left side, prompting me to figure out where they came from. At first I thought it was the same model that was sitting in front of the elevator, but as you can see, that's not the case. After a little more investigating, I was able to determine that this was a duplicate that ends up just appearing, so they'll slide into position to chase us. We can, however, avoid this chase, as they'll end up ignoring us. Doey will proceed the chase as if we are seen, but Doey will stick to a set path. They'll stop at this debris that we can eventually crawl through, and getting a bit too close ends up being my fatal mistake. I did try to take a shortcut here, but as you can see, it didn't work out so great. Carrying on, I slid down to the next area. So when we enter through this doorway, we'll see that Doey will appear to our left and up above. I checked all around to see if there are duplicate Doeys used for this part, but I didn't see any. However, I did see a bright dot in the distance, so I went in for a closer look. It turned out to be one of those canisters we'll be using to freeze Doey, just floating out here in the great beyond. As Trio Mutant Doey made their entrance, I managed to slide back through the door to safety. I wanted to see how they react, but they ended up being nowhere in sight. This is probably because we're not in there. However, moving closer to the door does cause Doey to appear for a brief moment, although it doesn't last long. Doey ended up climbing the crane that's in the center of the map, attempting to do the spit attack. It's clearly not working though, and it's probably because of where we're at. When Doey finished the attack on top of the crane, they tried to go underground, as they disappeared in the center of the room. What I came to realize though, is that by going to small boy mode here, you'll see that Doey is unable to grab us, making the player nearly invulnerable to attacks, or at least this one in particular. Hands off, you creep! It's once again visually strange looking, watching Doey perform this attack. It is pretty cool to see the saw go to work in slow motion though, just ripping and tearing away as Doey enters Pain Town. We can see as Doey performs this particular attack, how the hands will load in and slide up. I was so into watching this play out that I forgot that the hands may actually be damaging me right now, which ended up being the case, as I died while coming back to control my player. With the spit attack though, you can see how it's giant clusters of these multicolored spikes that come flying down. This does make one wonder just how much dough this beast can shoot, or rather generate, because they spit a ton of these at us. I think my size threw the monster off here though, seeing as there was some, aiming difficulties, as you can clearly see. Doey's determination to destroy me never deters though. So I give Doey the last saw blade treatment as we watch them melt into this puddle of goop. I win. Going out of bounds, we can see only so much that is loaded in at this point. I did find this battery socket though, which is located right below the final scene with Doey. A text under it reads, "Used for limiting use of hand scanners above." As soon as we use these hand scanners, Doey will be right behind us. There's not much else hidden during this sequence, but checking this whole interaction out in slow motion is pretty intense, as we savor every second of Doey's misery. It's truly a heartbreaking scene though, because Doey's potential for being good did show throughout this chapter. In the end though, it became too much weight to bear. Just like this drill is coming down. After this takes place, we can slide back out into the big area again if we wanted. However, not much is out here, aside from another model of Doey that's frozen. It is harmless, as we're able to walk right through it. Something else that took place was when I loaded this particular checkpoint up and came back to the deceased Doey, where I was able to start up the cutscene again with the hand scanners. It basically plays out just as it normally would, minus the drill being down already. I thought I soft locked myself at this point, seeing that I couldn't pull the drill down again. However, Doey ended up randomly taking damage from the drill, ultimately letting the scene play out and finish. This did result with me being stuck in the ground though. Let's give Doey a break, so they can rest in peace now, as we continue on. So after this traumatizing scene with Doey, we're now tasked with searching for survivors. This leads us to another tape that we can play, but follows with us sliding down this vent, where we can find Poppy and Kissy. Poppy is unpleased, as she begins to point the finger at us for everything that has happened. However, the big reveal takes place here as we discover that Ollie is in fact the prototype, who has been playing Poppy all along. A lot of dialogue occurs here, but ultimately ends with Poppy expressing how she can't go back, which follows with her leaving Kissy and the player. The prototype then blows up the floor beneath us, as we have this tragic scene with Kissy, who ends up losing her arm as she tries to hang on to us. Our new objective will present us with question marks, as we'll just want to push on at this point. Traversing through this cave we've fallen into will lead us to this area where there's a bunch of quite particular vegetation that's being grown here. I'm feeling some Resident Evil 5 vibes. Eventually we'll end up in this room where there's yet another tape. The head of innovation at Playtime Co., Leith Pierre, will begin talking. The dialogue gets dark real quick, seeing as playing this tape basically set off an alarm, as we're informed on the tape. This follows with us seeing a shadowy figure back from where we came, as we end up discovering that it's Huggy. Gas will start to fill the room as Chapter 4 concludes, with the credits rolling shortly after. It's time to go back though, and take a final, closer look at everything we just experienced. Now that Doey's gone, we have to search for survivors, with Poppy and Kissy being the only two remaining. We can find them down here waiting for us to slide down. There's not much going on in this area, so I went ahead and started this cutscene with Poppy and Kissy. It's an overall depressing vibe, as the sense of defeat creeps up on all the characters. There of course is no prototype lurking out of bounds during this, but we can watch Poppy abandon us as this plays out. It's an especially sad moment for Kissy, as you can see, but Poppy will make her way through this pipe and eventually disappear around the bend. We can watch as the floor gets blown up from under our feet too, as Kissy hangs on for her dear life. Eventually, Kissy's arm is going to give and fall off, but when it does, I noticed a thin piece of geometry that was attached to it, making for a peculiar sight. However, in slow motion, we'll see that Kissy and the arm are both flung back up above during this part. Kissy can then be sadly found, jammed in this fan inside the ventilation shaft, with her arm floating within the room we were just in. The phone can be found under the map, where we can just see it floating in the great beyond. Once we've fallen, the Kissy arm will quickly come back down for the scene, where we normally see it fall next to us. I'm not gonna lie though, I'm not sure what happened here, but I ended up getting my one hand stuck out of bounds, which led to this confusing direction it took. The hand was running back and forth along the arm, ultimately being a situation I couldn't make sense of. Just look at this work of art. Glorious! We're now approaching the end, as we walk through this final area. Nothing is really going on out of bounds here, but we can absolutely get a closer look at Huggy Wuggy during this final scene. He's definitely got some mileage on him with all the wounds he sustained, but you can see in his face his spirits are still high. His terrifying run towards the door is great to watch in slow motion in all its horror. It's an intense reveal for our old foe. With the no pain, no gain mentality, he viciously shows that he's ready for a second shot at devouring us. Or perhaps helping us this time? Who knows? Once the credits roll though, we'll see that he is then placed into the room we are in, as he assumes the T-pose position. Looks like Huggy's gonna be back for Chapter 5. That's for sure. With that though, we've concluded our out of bounds journey through the entirety of Poppy Playtime Chapter 4. I hope you enjoyed this behind the scenes look, glitches and all. And of course, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!